a symbol of this congregation and its ongoing life in the world while we're in this time of a sort of nomadic period. It used to sit hanging in the front of our old sanctuary, and every Sunday it would be burning, and it burned throughout the week. We do change candles, it's not actually a miracle. But it always continues. And since we've been in our nomadic period, every week a different family has been taking home the candle to keep it through the week and bring back and reflect on it with the community. So this week it was our family's turn. I set up a way for it not to get tipped over by the cats by sticking little command strips underneath the base, because that would have been bad if I'd taken it home and broken it. But so it sat on our mantelpiece this week and was burning through the week, and we took some time kind of reflecting on it. I showed it to the baby, we looked at it for a while. But I think the thing that I was reflecting on most is this morning, I was up with Maddie feeding her at about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and scrolling through Twitter on my phone. And while I was doing that, I came across the news of the terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka this morning, or Easter, which was many hours ago now there. And after seeing that news, after I put Maddie back down, ended up coming out into the living room and looking at the flame and kind of sitting with that for a few minutes. And then later in the morning I came across this Easter reflection that I'm going to share with you all that I think ties into kind of ongoing work of the church and kind of speaks to what the flame did for me this morning. This is from, I'll cite it at the end. When hope was nowhere to be found, when destruction was the only thing in sight, when our loss was so great, still they arose and found each other, the women, and maybe the non-binary folks too, to be together, to bring their spices and tend to the crucified body of God. So courageous, going back to the site of pain, so faithful, refusing to turn from their beloved one's body, so strong, their desire to meet such an ugly reality with such a soft kind of care. They are the first miracle of Easter. This is the power of the resurrection, the aliveness of Christ in them, the body of Christ still living. They only needed to be reminded of what they already knew, like we all do sometimes, especially when the circumstances look grim. Destruction still persists. Crucifixions continue, and still something stays alive, something in us, something that still draws us toward each other, vulnerably, fiercely, with hope of overcoming. This is the power of God in us. The power to find each other, to hold and be held, the power to find and create life in the midst of death-dealing forces, the power to love after loss, the power to keep creating art and music and joy, the power to keep saying no to systems of evil, and to keep saying yes to our love of each other, to the beauty of the world around us, to the possibilities of creating the worlds we desire. The tomb is empty, Christ has risen, and in us will rise again and again and again. That's by the Reverend M. Barclay. So, that's our eternal flame, and I don't know, do we have someone picked out to take it home this week? Who would be a good person to talk to if you want to volunteer?
Pastor Aaron.
Pastor Aaron! Think about that during church and talk to Pastor Aaron afterwards.
Thank you, Mary. So our beloved choir director, Jessie, is due to have her baby first thing in the morning. We always knew we were pushing it with a day after Easter due date, and indeed we did. So we send her and her family our very best this morning and sing this out for her honor.
Children can understand. So this time, I did not talk to her about this beforehand, so we'll see how this goes. It's Sonny, do you want to come up here?
Come on,
You
it's
don't have to
Sonny.
if you don't want to.
It's Sonny.
So you have to get up on the table and dance. No, you don't. All right, so Sonny, what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to have you take 5 spoonfuls of this soil and put it into the bowl. You can have a spoon. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Awesome. And now I have some seeds, which I was going to go out and buy seeds, but then shout out to Walmart grocery pickup. They gave me these for free. So I was really excited about that. Anyways, I want you to make the soil all flat and pat it down a bit. Perfect. And now I want you to make just a little hole in the middle so we can put a seed in there. Perfect. Now put out your hand. Ah, spider. Kidding. We're going to put those seeds in. Then we're going to cover it back up with the soil. All right. You're welcome to keep that, or you can leave it up here. It's up to you. Cool. So why on earth did I just make a 5th grader come up and plant a flower? Well, we're going to use this illustration as a way to communicate the hope that we have in our faith in God. So when we talk about faith is, it says in Hebrews, the assurance of things that we do not see. And so we're focusing this morning on this aspect of hope. And hope is having this assurance that it's something that we can't see, something that's going to come in the future. And so just like planting a flower, we do the work that we're supposed to do. We remember our faith and we plant the seeds in hope, knowing that God comes through, that God brings things from death to life, and that God grows us in ways that we can't even imagine. And so I hope this morning you take a moment to remember that God is growing you, that your faith is real, and that your faith is important, and that God loves you and wants to grow you even throughout the hard seasons.
First day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary of Magdala came to the tomb. She saw that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance, so she ran off to Simon, Peter, and the other disciples, the one Jesus loved, and told them, "Rabbi has been taken from the tomb. We don't know where they put Jesus." At that, Peter and the other disciples started out toward the tomb. They were running side by side. But then the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He didn't enter, but bent down to peer in and saw the linen wrappings on the ground, and saw the piece of cloth that had covered Jesus' head lying not with the wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the disciple who had arrived first at the tomb went in. He saw and believed. As yet, they didn't understand the scripture that Jesus was to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. Meanwhile, Mary stood weeping beside the tomb. Even as she wept, she stooped to peer inside, and there she saw two angels in dazzling robes. One was seated at the head, and the other at the foot of the place where Jesus' body had lain. They asked her, "Why are you weeping?" She answered them, "Because they have taken away my rabbi, and I don't know where they have put the body." No sooner had she said this than she turned around and caught sight of Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. He asked her, "Why are you weeping? For whom are you looking?" She supposed it was the gardener, so she said, "Please, if you're the one who carried Jesus away, tell me where you've laid the body, and I will take it away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him and said, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus then said, "Don't hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to Abba God. Rather, go to the sisters and brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Abba and to your Abba, my God and your God." Mary of Magdala went to the disciples. "I have seen the teacher," she announced. Then she reported what the Savior had said to her. May God have wisdom to the hearing of these words.
Easter, an alternative gospel. I'm just going to move over here so I can see all your faces over there as well. What does Easter mean for us today? So I want to begin this morning with a game I just made up.
Oh, yeah.
Called Name That Movie. So I'll explain briefly a movie, and if you know that movie, just shout out the name. Okay?
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic
Park. It's all down.
No. This movie, there's three of them. The first one involves a successful psychiatrist who has a strained relationship with his wife. During this time, he's also treating a young boy.
Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense. Very good.
Wow.
That young boy claims that he can see and interact with dead people, by the way.
Oh!
So the second film, this one's a little bit harder. A depressed man suffering from insomnia meets a strange soap salesman named Tyler Durden. Fight Club. Whoa! All right. Some major Fight Club nerds over here. Okay. So I'll finish explaining it. Soon finds himself living in his house after his perfect apartment is destroyed. The two men who are bored form an underground club with strict rules and fight each other. Other people who are living mundane lives. So the third and final one. A young man named Mr. Burbank.
Mr. Banks.
No, just wanted to see if anybody was a nerd on this one. There's a very ordinary life in a small town until he realizes he has not traveled outside of this town.
Phenomenon.
Truman Show! Wow! Very good. I'll just finish. Man, you guys got that ahead of time too. His growing desire becomes such an urge that he tries to leave, only everything, including, it seems like, the weather, pushes against him. These are 3 stories. What do they have in common? They're all movies. Oh, well done. You get the golden egg. Whoever said that. By the way, there is a golden egg, which kids will get later on, so just tuck that away for later. All 3 of these movies have a surprise twist. In other words, they tell a story that if you pay attention as the story unfolds, it begins to reframe the whole story. I used to think I knew what Easter was about. And over time, as I've learned some things, it has reframed the entire story for me. I wonder if that will happen again, if that's something that keeps happening. How many of you have ever heard the phrase or parts of this phrase, Jesus Christ was the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, who came to proclaim the gospel and bring forgiveness of sins? Anybody heard that phrase or pieces of that phrase before? Right, most of us? Let's explore what this might have meant to those who first said these phrases. January 1st of 42 BCE, a long time ago, a decree went out through the Roman Senate that the Caesar, then Julius Caesar, was given a title, Divus Julius, which is to say divine Julius or deified Julius. He was the first Caesar to be declared a god. 45 years roughly before Jesus. After his death, his empire was divided into thirds with 3 different rulers, which is hard to manage. Usually, people want more power, right? And so over the next decade, the next 10 years, there was civil unrest until finally one person rose up and united the 3 into one. His name was Octavian. He was the adopted son of Caesar. In many ways, he was known as a son of the divine Caesar or a son of a god. He brought about a sort of peace, what now is known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. We have writings, for example, from one poet, Horace, who says, "You, O Caesar, have wiped away our sins," referring to Caesar as one who has taken away the violence that they had known and brought about peace. Another writer, Virgil, writes, "Augustus Caesar, son of God, the savior of the human race." Interesting, isn't it? He continues, "Caesar is to be honored as a god with sacrifice and hymns." So Octavian, the son of God, in many ways a prince of peace, set to unite the Roman Empire to bring about peace. As they went out, after they united the 3, they went out to conquer more, to widen this peace. And as they did, they conquered other people. They would force those conquered people to make a confession. Caesar is Lord. And if they did not confess, they were often tortured or killed. And once they confessed and were assimilated and the Roman Empire expanded, those that conquered would come back to the rulers with what they called the gospel. The good news that now our Roman Empire has expanded. So, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, who came to proclaim the gospel and bring about forgiveness of sins, was in direct opposition of many of the statements they would have known that were geared towards Caesar or towards Rome. I think oftentimes, what at least I've experienced when it comes to things like Easter, is religious people like to argue about the very specifics of what happened that day. Did Jesus literally rise? What does that look like? Was a physical body resuscitated? And if we believe the right things about that, then there's a sort of magical transaction that goes on in God's mind, and now you're parted. But I wonder sometimes, and our beliefs are important, but I wonder sometimes if we get hung up on things that aren't really the point, and we miss, for example, if we're watching The Sixth Sense, we miss the fact that Bruce Willis, the main character in that movie, has been dead the whole time. Or most of the time. Oh, sorry. If have not seen The Sixth Sense yet, that was not a spoiler. You still have to go back and watch it. It's still worth it. Don't worry. Don't need to throw eggs at me yet. I think when it comes to beliefs about the specifics of the resurrection, I've come to hold a very open hand. Because I don't know, even if you read through the gospel, we have 4 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they don't all agree on all the specifics of what happened that day. And they tell it with very specific, I think, political meanings. And so I take that to mean the point isn't all the specific data of what happened that day as much as what happens and what Easter meant and what it means for us today. So I'd like to say, I think Easter means the following. That it was the resurrection or the recognition that Christ's presence continued to be experienced. Thus his teaching, this way of being human, what he called the kingdom, we often here at Trinity call kingdom, was not dead, but it continued. It expanded. And that we see this being lived out in a community who gathered together and carried this on. Hope to continue. Resurrection, in other words, means that the same spirit that was within Christ continued to live. Or, as one author writes, Dr. Robin Myers, a pastor, a peace activist, author, and a professor, he writes the following: Easter was God's yes to a peasant revolution and God's no to the Roman Empire. In other words, Easter was an alternative gospel, an alternative good news, an alternative way of living. The cross, I don't think, was a blood sacrifice to appease an angry God. It was the result of a person confronting the very way society was formed, the very way they were living, the very way the Roman Empire was expanding through military violence and conquest. And Good Friday exposed the truth, which I think is important, the truth that violence and oppression and coercion are not the way. But Easter brings hope, hope that we can actually do something to bring about change. Anybody know what tomorrow is?
Monday.
Easter Monday. Earth Day, there we go, and Earth Day. That's the one I was going for, but I guess you're right either way. It's Earth Day. So in light of that, some interesting statistics. Probably many of these you've heard before. The planet's average surface temperature has risen about 1.62 degrees since the late 19th century. Most of that warming, by the way, has occurred in the last 35 years. Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets have decreased in mass. Antarctica lost about 127 billion tons of ice per year between 1993 and 2016. While Greenland, during that same time, lost about 286 billion tons of ice per year. In 1910, the Glacier National Park was home to more than an estimated 150 glaciers. As of June 2017, that number is 26 and shrinking. The Arctic region, many think, may have its first completely ice-free summer by the year 2040. It's just 21 years away. In the last 30 years, the world has lost half of its coral reefs. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of the surface ocean waters has increased by 30%. Global sea levels rose about 8 inches in the last century, and it's predicted in the next century to rise 1 to 6 feet. These are startling facts. They are meant to expose a truth. The truth that our world is changing. That if we continue to live as we are, we cannot continue into the future. And yet, while facts are important and helpful, I'm really beginning to believe more and more that we need an alternative. We need hope. We need stories that inspire people, that say there are ways to change. I think facts are important, and like Good Friday, they expose the truth, but we need Easter. We need alternative gospels. One such alternative gospel, Greta Thunberg. Some of you probably have heard her name before, 16-year-old from Sweden. She's inspiring this massive change. She did a speech at the COP21 gathering in Poland. And I like to read that speech. It's short, so it's not going to be very long. She was then 15 years old. She says, "My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I am from Sweden. I speak on the behalf of climate justice now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do, but I've learned you are never too small to make a difference." Feels a little bit like gospel message in there. Reminds me a little bit of that seed that Asami planted. If a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine, by the way, she started this movement of stepping out of school to raise awareness. Just imagine what we could do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. So here's a 15-year-old girl calling out leaders of our globe. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and the living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the suffering of many which pay for the luxuries of a few. The year 2078, I will be celebrating my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask me why you didn't do anything while there was still time to act. Every time I read this by myself, I lost it. So give me a moment. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you're stealing their future. Gosh, I can't read. Stealing their future in front of their eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done rather than on the political possibility, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within the system are so impossible to find, maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past and will continue to ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. We have come to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. This 15-year-old then and 16-year-old now is starting this whole movement. March 15th, of about a month ago, 1.4 million students around the world joined her in striking, protesting. The next major climate strike is scheduled to take place on May 24th. Not saying I advocate for kids not going to school, but what a cause to stand up for. And what a way for a young person to live an alternative gospel. To live in such a way that inspires others, that says, yes, the facts are dire, we need to do something. Let's take that and do something. I use global warming, climate change here because of Earth Day, because I think it's probably our greatest crisis that we face in our generation. But it's not the only crisis, there's others. Racism, sexism, oppression of LGBTQ people, rejection of immigrants. You can go on, and I think the same could be said of each of these. The facts are startling, and we need stories that bring about hope and inspire us to change. Last week I talked about a documentary on Netflix that my family watched, Our Planet. I don't know if anybody has seen that.
Yes.
But what it does, good stuff. Truthful stuff. A big part of what it does that I think is good is it points out nature and the globe, what's happening, especially within the last 20 to 50 years. but it also shows what can happen when we change. How nature can bounce back in incredible forms within a decade or two. It's inspiring. It brought us, my two boys, 7 and 9, say, Daddy, what can we do to combat this, to keep this from happening? So I know we're not all going to talk in front of thousands of people, but we all can take small actions that can inspire others to take small actions. And those small actions can add up to a large movement to bring about change. And this is what I think Easter is all about. A small group of people banding together who experienced the presence of Jesus and said there is an alternative gospel to this that we are experiencing. Jesus often used the metaphor of leaven. A little leaven leavens the whole piece of bread. A little bit can go a long ways. There's a gal I know, Jessica Zimmerly. Some of you might know her. She works at Earth Ministry. Earth Ministry used to be housed in our old building. They since moved to St. John United Lutheran Church on Fitty Ridge. But she told me of a story where in college she would unplug the microwave. And that her roommates were like, what are you doing? Got a little bit annoyed and then asked, like, why are you doing that? And she said, well, because I care about God's creation and I care that we're wasting electricity when things are plugged in. And so all of her roommates began to unplug. Now they understand what's going on, and they begin to unplug. And one of her roommates moved out and got frustrated and said, none of my other roommates unplug the microwave. What do I do? And she said, well, just tell them why you're doing it. Just explain it. And so she did, and all of her roommates began to unplug the microwave, right? And then she told me this story. You know what I did? Unplug the microwave. Now it's in my consciousness, right? So it may seem silly, but these small changes inspire others in small ways. Easter was God's yes to a small, seemingly unimportant peasant revolution, and God's no to the Roman Empire. So I leave you with this. Easter happens every time you say yes to God's leading and no to the narratives of greed and power. Every time you recycle, every time you reuse, every time you buy used, every time you buy local, every time you decide to drive less, every time you show up for a meeting to learn about the ways you can stand with the oppressed, every signature you sign to stand with others, give a voice to those who don't have a voice. Every time, as a parent, you seek to find ways to teach your kids about justice, climate, compassion. Every time you spend extra time on your way to work, to take public transportation, to walk, to cut back. Every time you eat less meats, or you find out where your food is coming from. Every time you decide to spend more money on clothes that will last instead of engaging in fast fashion. Every time you vote, every time you choose to forgive, every time you sign up for a just cause or stand up for a just cause, every time you unplug a microwave. You are saying yes to the counter gospel and no to the gospel of power and greed. Easter reminds us that the same Spirit lives on within each of us, and that collectively our small choices add up, and we continue to be a part of that alternative gospel. To say Jesus is Lord is really a defiant act that says the powers that be are not, and I refuse to engage in that way of living. Amen? And
Amen. The poem is called The Waking God, not the Walking God. Either. He's both waking and walking. The first Sunday, after the first full moon, after the northern spring equinox, they say, is the beginning of days that will outlast nights. The beginning of days that will outlast nights. First at Passover around the table, saying, "This is my body given for you," nobody blinked an eye, did they? Their Paschal lamb was too familiar an idea, a symbol, but not yet something realizing right before their eyes. "Where are you going?" Peter asked. "Why can't I follow you now?" At the tomb, John writes how they ran. John hesitated outside. Peter rushed in. Then together, they see this in John's words. The linen all unwrapped, and the cloth that had been over his head, that was not with the wrapping, but rolled up in a place by itself. As they stared, they took in everything about it, everything they knew in their world of tombs and stones, spears and burials, blood and water, Roman guards, crucifixions, and knowing about the 100 pounds of myrrh and aloe, the 100 pounds of spices that Joseph of Arimathea had brought and used wrapping the burial cloths 3 days before. "Then I believed," Peter said. "Till this moment," John says, "we had not understood." Today, another festival has arrived in this land, a faint shadow of its forerunner, so alien and far, far from the tomb. Yet still we are all brooded over by the Spirit that was so needfully sent to teach us all things and remind us of everything that was said. Every day there might be some detail coming to us, some realization, some dawn. The headcloth rolled up where it shouldn't be. When we suddenly understand that till this moment we had not understood. So however we hold with resurrection, or it holds with us, putting our precious feet on the morning floor, we will remember our hallelujahs for these days that will outlast nights. He is risen.